Alright guys, we're going to get started. So usually, not today, because I feel like last night's workshop was a little simple, and looking at the solutions is, I think, self-explanatory since it's all about formatting and stuff. But usually, like tomorrow, I will go over 2 of the workshop problems. And I will post something on the Slack where you guys can vote 2 problems each on which ones you guys want me to do. Okay? So just look out for Slack tomorrow. But I just wanted to let you guys know that. Okay? So today, we're going to be talking about loops. Can everybody see this? In the back, you guys good? Okay. So, what is a loop? In the simplest terms, a loop is designed so that all of the code inside of it will be executed up over and over again until a certain condition is broken. So what do I mean by that? So before I show you what I mean by that, I want you guys to know that there are 2 kinds of loops, right? Well, there's more than 2 kinds of loops, but we will be talking about 2 kinds of loops today: a while loop and a for loop. So now let's get into while loops, okay? So to start off a while loop, first you need the structure, like you would write an if statement, right? Like if true console.log hello world, right? So if I run this program, we get true. Loops, as you might have seen yesterday briefly at the bottom of a slide, you saw that loops also have a block structure as well. However, how do you write them? It's actually very similar. While true. So, what this is actually saying is while, just like an if statement, inside of the parentheses, while whatever is in here is truthy, then this code will run. And it will continue to run until this is false. Okay? So what do you think will happen if I run this code? It will keep on printing hello world, and we will get big problems, right? This will go forever and ever until your computer runs out of memory. This is what we call an infinite loop. Infinite loops are bad. Infinite loops break things. They are not wanted, okay? And they could slow your system down. So, how can we possibly get this to print like 3 times? Does anyone have any ideas? Yeah.
False condition.
I'm sorry?
False condition.
Well, yeah. But like, we want this to be false here, right? So we can't actually just put true in here. So we need to do something that'll make it false. Yeah.
You can create a counter.
Yes, you can create a counter. So we can say up here, let counter equal 1. Okay? And now we could say while counter is not equal to 3, we will console log this, and then here we will do plus plus. So now we get now we get it 3 times. Let me slow down a second and show you what I'm doing. I'm declaring a variable that's just called counter, and I'm setting it equal to the number 0, the integer 0, right? Then I'm saying while that variable is not equal to 3. Triple equals would look like this, right? Just 3 equal signs. But if I want not triple equals, I remove the first one and put an exclamation point or a bang. We call that a bang, okay? So if it's not equal to 3, while this statement is true, is 0 not equal to 3? True, right? 0 is 0. So we console.log hello world, and then there's something else in the code block, right? Counter plus plus. What is plus plus? Plus plus is shorthand. Plus plus is the same thing as shorthand, not really, but it is shorthand for plus equals 1. which is shorthand for counter, is now equal to counter plus 1. So counter, which is 0, we are reassigning its value to that value, adding 1. But this is annoying to write. So if you ever just want to increment something by 1, you could just do plus plus. Or if you really want to, plus equals 1. Get it? So now I'm saying that counter, after this statement, counter will be 1. So then, now that we've reached the bottom of the loop, we have to check and see if this condition is still true. Is 1 not equal to 3? 1 is not equal to 3. 1 is 1, 3 is 3. So this is true, so we keep going, and we get the second hello world. Then we add 1 again to that 1. So so now counter is 2, right? Do you guys understand what's going on, right? So when counter, the next time, after we get this hello world, and counter is now 3, we check, is 3 not equal to 3? That is false. 3 is 3. 3 is equal to 3. So once counter is 3, this no longer runs. Any questions on this? Makes sense, right? So what if I said, let's write a function that takes in a number called countdown, that takes in a number and countdowns from that number, console logs in the terminal, countdowns from that number to 0, right? So how can we do this? So we could say, inside of our function, we could say, let counter equals 0. Well, no, we don't. Let counter equal num. Well, no, we don't actually need to do this. So we could just do while num is not equal to 0. We can say console.log num. Then we could just decrease num, right? Minus minus is the same thing as plus plus, except we're decrementing, not incrementing, we are decrementing, okay? Does that make sense? So now, if we call this countdown, and we pass in 5, what we get is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Does everyone see how I did that? Does anyone have any questions on while loops? If I don't do this, it just console.logs 5 over and over again, right? Because num is always going to be checked, and num is not ever going to be 0 because I'm passing in 5 here. So you have to change that value. You have to change that value that is being compared in the while loop and make sure that it will eventually meet this condition, right? Any questions? Yeah.
So in general, when you feed a variable into a function, every time you use that variable within the function, I guess the information I'm getting from this is it doesn't check what the variable you input was again every time you reuse it. It seems to like it's possible to change it and continue using it. Is that right? Because I thought in this scenario you'd have to like create a counter because you couldn't like change a variable as you went.
In this situation, you don't need to do that because we are only using this parameter once. Okay. Let me say one thing to you. There is some jargon I want to explain to you guys. Num is a parameter. It is what will capture the argument. when it is passed into the function. Parameters are when we define functions, right? We reference that as a parameter. An argument is the value you pass into a function when it is invoked. So these parameters are actually just variables. They're just declared variables. And they will never have a value. Well, they do have a value. That value is undefined. It will be undefined unless you pass something in. If I called countdown without passing anything in, you will try to decrement undefined, and we'll get an error, because undefined is not a number, and you cannot perform mathematical operations to undefined. So you could think of it like a variable. If I did up here, like, instead of let counter equals 0, if I just did let counter, that's fine. I can do that if I really wanted to, right? It's just going to be a declared variable that is in my computer space that I can use later and assign a different value. However, its value will be undefined. Yeah?
If you change the 0 in the block to, say, a 1, would it just skip the 1 but then still run to 0?
Will it still run to 0? No. Why don't I skip the 1 and go to 0? Because num is going down by 1 every time, right? So the last time we saw this console.log, num was 2, right? So console.log 2, we get 2. Then we do 2 minus minus. So now we get 1, right? So now we check, is 1 not equal to 1? This is false. That means this code block doesn't run anymore. So where would that means that we break out of the loop. The loop is done. We break out. So this console log will never run again, right? We can finally reach line 13, which is the end of the function. Does that make sense? Nice. Yeah.
Is there any advantage to saying num does not equal 0 as opposed to num is greater than 0 in that case? Like num is greater than 0?
Well, if you want to make sure that you'll never get a negative number, see, there is an advantage to that because not equal to 1 or not equal to 0 is very specific, right? That is trusting, like, let's say it's a bigger loop, a bigger function, and that is trusting that that number will be decremented by only 1 every time, right? Whereas if you want to make sure you never get below a certain point, then greater than 0 would be the way to go, right? Effectively, though, it does the same thing. Everyone cool on this? Okay. Now, I am going to show you for loops, okay? For loops pretty much do the same thing, okay? However, for loops are written a little bit more complicated than a while loop. It's not complicated at all, but it's not just like a parenthesis. Because a for loop, you define 3 things, okay? At like the start, right? So, of course, just like a while loop, you have your parentheses and your brackets like that, right? But instead of while, we write for. So now, inside of this thing, we have 3 things we need to put in here, okay? The first thing will be to define, like a statement that will happen immediately at the beginning of the for loop. It can be anything, but usually people use this opportunity to set up a counter. So I say let I equal 0. Why am I using I? This is very common. I, because I stands for iterator, or I stands for index, which I will get to in a second, right? So at the very beginning of this loop, we are creating a variable I and setting it equal to 0. Then you separate it with a semicolon. Then our second statement will be the thing that went into the while loop, right? The conditional expression. Okay? So I is less than 10. 5. And then we do what we want to do at the end when we reach the end of the for loop, right? This is what we do here. So here we do I++. Does this make sense? Everything is pretty much the same as this example up here, except this would go in here, and this would go in here, right? It's the same thing. I think this is actually better because I feel like it could be a little easy for you to forget to increment your counter at the end of your code block. You could, since it goes at the end, you could be writing all your logic to solve your problem with your function or whatever, and then forget to increment counter, forget to increment I. And that will cause problems, right? So here, you get everything out of the way immediately. You set up how long you want your loop to run, what you want to do every time, whatever. So here, if I just write console.log I, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Why don't I get the 5? Yeah.
Less than 5.
Exactly.
Start at 0.
When I is 5 less than 5? No. 5 is 5, right? So if I did less than or equal to, then we get the 5, because that statement is still true then. So we continue the loop. The point is for this statement to be false, the middle statement, and then we can actually break out of the loop, right? So this is a basic for loop. I will show you now a little complicated function, okay? That we can use this for loop to loop through a string. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions on for loops? Yeah.
For the condition, I've only really seen for loops like as a counter, so it's usually like I less than or greater than to
Yeah.
number. But can it, like in a while loop, like in the base case of whatever it's called for the while loop, can you put in like a Boolean value, like as long as something is true, or can you put anything in there?
You mean like as long as...
Like, is the only use case like a counter here? For the
No.
condition?
So these are just statements. This is something that is being done at the beginning. This is something that is being checked. This is something that is being done at the end of a code run. Those can be anything.
So my question is for the second one, the thing that you can check, can it be a Boolean value instead of just whether something is less than 5?
Something that is less than 5 does return a Boolean value, I just want to say. But like, yes, you can. You can check while this variable is still equal to false. You could say while this string is still equal to my name, or has a length of this, right? You can check anything.
And the 3 things in the parentheses are option line.
Yeah, you don't actually need all of these things in here. I mean, see, like, for loops are a little weird. You can kind of mess around with them and play around with them and see wherever you want. But this is, what I just showed you is like kind of like basic, you know?
Okay.
Which is actually what you will be using most of the time.
Okay. Then one more question. What's the difference between the I++ and the ++I? Because I just saw from the solution video from our pre-works, the advisor used ++I remember.
So, do you guys remember how I said plus plus is shorthand for plus equals 1? And do you also remember how I said that's sort of not true? It's because it isn't true, okay? But it kind of does the same thing. So the reason why it isn't true is because I++ returns the value and then increments it. It's not really a reassignment immediately. It returns the value and then increments it. ++I increments the value and then returns it.
So values is equal, or I mean
It's kind of the same thing. It's just what point in time is the incrementing being done. It's like, in very rare cases will that matter.
Okay.
Just so you know.
Can you just go over the difference between the while and the for loops? Like, why would you use a while?
So this is a great question. Can I just show you guys one function before I get into that question, okay? I just want to show you, like, when you would use a for loop. I mean, you can use, while loops and for loops are interchangeable, right? As you just saw, the 3 things that were in the while loop, I just put in here. It's kind of very similar, right? So let me just show you one thing. Let's say I have let example equal what is this. And let's say I wanted to console.log all of the letters that are capitalized. Let's say I wanted to write a function that did that, right? So let's say I'd write const gimme capitals. And I'm going to set that equal to a function, okay? I can write functions this way, right? Get familiar with that. I'm declaring a constant variable called gimme capitals, and I'm setting it equal to this anonymous function that does nothing, okay? Is everyone cool with that? Okay, cool. So this function will take a string, okay? So now we will say for let I equals 0, I is less than string dot length, I plus plus. So what am I setting up right now? What am I doing? I'm declaring a variable I and I'm setting it equal to 0. Does everybody know how strings have indexes? Each character in a string is an actual index, right? And you remember that the first index is actually index 0. That is why I is being set to 0, okay? So we will loop through and loop through and loop through, but why am I doing I is less than string.length? Let's say it's my name, Marco, right? How many letters is that? 5. So the length of that string is 5. But at index 0 is M, at index 4 is O, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what is at index 5? Nothing. If you try to access a string's index where there is no character, what you get is undefined. So you do I is less than the string.length because we don't want I to be string.length, okay? Does that make sense? So now I will say an if statement inside of here. If string at I is triple equal to string at I dot to uppercase invoked, I will console.log string at I. And then here, I will call gimme capitals with example. Oh, I got the spaces too. And oh, geez. Nope. Oh, wow, that's a real word. No, it's not. Wait, wait, I. Sorry, I missed the last I. So, this is a little confusing here, but what I'm doing is I'm saying, you guys are unfamiliar with the and operator, right? That's okay. So, this is just a little preview to what we'll be doing tomorrow. So, what I'm saying is, while I am looping through this string, right? And what do I mean looping through this string? I'm not actually looping through the string. I'm just incrementing I. I'm incrementing I by 1 every time. And I myself, as a programmer, am using that to access every index, right? String at I. I is going to change every time. So first it'll be string at 0, string at 1, string at 2, string at 3. And if you remember the bracket notation with the number, that's how we get these different characters. So now what I'm saying, if string at I is triple equal to that same string at I dot to uppercase. Have you guys seen 2 uppercase before? 2 uppercase just makes the letter an uppercase. As 2 lowercase makes the letter lowercase. So if that is equal, and this double and sign means that this also has to be equal. Okay? I'm not going to get into that right now because there's a little more behind the scenes, but I'm just saying I just wanted to get rid of the spaces. And I'm making sure that string at I is not equal to a space character. So now the space character, if it was space, because for some reason that is true with spaces, it won't be console logged. And instead all we get is weighty. Yeah.
So, I'm string uppercase. I thought you were making everything like the whole entire thing uppercase. So how come we have the Only letters right there are the uppercase ones. How about the lowercase ones? Does that negate it?
Well, the thing I'm trying to do with this function is to just console log the uppercase letters. So this is checking to see if the current letter is uppercase.
Oh.
By saying, is this letter, string at I is a letter, right? Each time it will be a different letter. I'm going to check if that is triple equals to, if that is equal to that letter uppercase. And that will be true if this is uppercase, right? So then we console.log. If it's lowercase, forget it. That's not what our functions do.
So you sort of just accessing the uppercase?
Yeah. Any other questions? Any questions on this function? Seriously. Okay. So back to your question. When would you use a for loop and a while loop? Why are there both? Well, what's the point, you know? So, honestly, it's up to you. It is up to you when to use which loop, what you feel more comfortable doing. My honest opinion, if you want my honest opinion, some questions are very, very easily to reason about using while loops. The logic just makes more sense. You will see that maybe in the workshop. When you're looping through strings, right? And you are incrementing things by one every time, for me, it makes more sense to use a for loop. Usually, I use for loops for everything, personally, because I like how everything is defined at the top in one place. You don't have to search through your code to see where the counter is being incremented. But also, you can argue that for loops are more structured, so that gives you less freedom. The counter is always going to be incremented at the end, whereas in a while loop, you can increment the counter wherever you want, or you can do whatever you want anywhere, right? So that's my opinion. Yeah.
So it's just a matter of preference. I'm sorry, I missed the beginning. Are for loops usually for incrementing and while usually for decrementing? That's kind of how
No, you can decrement in a for loop.
No, I know that, but like typically, while if you're going to be decrementing, while loops would be better sometimes.
I mean, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true, like, specifically towards incrementing and decrementing. But it's just like the logic of what the problem wants you to do. It's hard to give like an exact example for why while loops would be better.
So for loops is more for like if you want something specific, and while loops is for maybe working more creative.
Well, if you really want to think about it that way, ultimately they do the same thing. Ultimately they do the same thing. Really. It's more personal preference, in my opinion. Does anyone have any questions about looping in general? Yeah.
So what if I wanted to move from the end of the string to the front and then print the capitals that way?
That way? So I would set I equal to string.length minus 1, and as long as I is greater than or equal to 0. And then I do I minus minus. So now we get it itio. Right? So I set I equal to string.length minus 1 because what is string.length? It's the actual length, right? Which is one more than the last index. So you need to set it to string.length minus 1. So you start I at the end. And then you decrement, and then as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, once you get that negative, there are no negative indexes, and we stop the loop. Before I get into the slides, I want to show you two keywords. Do you guys understand what keywords are? For. Well, yes, that's what I'm going to show. Oh, hey, take it easy. For, while, return, let, const, function. These are all keywords. That means you cannot call variables these words because they have specific definitions in the JavaScript language. So, after that, two keywords I will say will be break and continue. These two keywords are used in loops. So what do I mean by that? Let's say I have a while loop, right? Let me make this a little bit. So let's say I have like let counter equals 0. So while counter is less than 10. And then at the end, I'll just do counter plus plus, right? So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to console.log all of the even numbers. Okay? So I can do that by saying if counter mod 2 is not equal to 0, continue. So if I do this, oh geez, did I spell something wrong? Huh? Huh?
First one, that
What?
I'm missing a U.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I asked the room that and expected to understand like 30 people talking at once. My bad. So now we have 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. 9 is... I think that's just at the end, right? No, it's 10. Why am I getting 9 here? Oh, wait. Now the 9's gone, right? Okay, cool. So don't be fooled. This 9 is just like the return value, okay? Of the entire page. Like at the end of this, the counter will be 9, okay? Right? Like the end thing of the page, counter, like I said, returns the value, then it increments it. So counter, like if I say return, if I console.log, if I return this, like that will be 9. What the fuck is going on? Oh no. Fuck. What H? And then we get 9. Oh yeah. It's 9 because we're console logging the counter before we increment it, right? Sorry, I tripped myself up a little bit. So what I'm saying is, if the counter is less than 10, counter is 0, we loop, right? So if counter mod 2, do you guys know what mod is? Modula? It returns the remainder. So anything mod 2, if it returns 0, it's even, right? Because 2 goes into any even number evenly, so there will be no remainder. So if it's not 2, we increment the counter because we still need to do that because it's a while loop, and then we continue. When we hit the continue keyword, that means the rest of this is skipped and we begin a new iteration. Okay? So that means 0 mod 2 is actually 0. So we console.log 0 and we increment the counter to 1, right? So then we go to 1. 1 mod 2 is not 0, so we increment it to 2, and then we continue. We skip the console log, and you don't see 1 here, okay? And we continue this and continue this, and then we get counter is equal to 8, right? So then we get counter is equal to 8. We console.log 8. Counter is now 9. Then we say while counter is less than 10, if counter mod 2 is not equal to 0,
I think it's because you have counter, you're incrementing twice.
oh, oh, yeah. So we're, okay, yeah. So we increment, so it's 9, and then we continue. Yeah, okay. This is why I don't like while loops, man. But that's what I'm trying to show you is the point of the continue keyword. Once you hit the continue keyword, the while loop or for loop, this works in for loops too, it doesn't stop. However, it skips the rest of the code, and then it starts iterating again. Okay? So that's one example of this. Then we have another keyword. We have the break keyword. So if I do let I equals 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. If I is equal to 3, console.log console.log found it, and then I will say break. And then outside of here, I will say not 3, right? So if I do this, I say not 3, not 3, not 3. Then once I is 3, found it, break. Break stops the loop. Break automatically breaks out of the loop if it is ever hit. Okay? If I did not put this inside of this if statement, the loop would run only until it hits that break keyword. If I put this break keyword at the very top of the loop would never run. It would see the break and then break out immediately, right? Like if I put this here, nothing happens because it just breaks out of the loop immediately. So I put it here, and once I is 3, once it was incremented to 3, we console.log found it, and then we break out of the loop. Simple, right? Break and continue, I feel, are very easy to grasp because it kind of makes sense. Continue the loop, break out of the loop. It's very English, right? Any questions before I get into the slides? The slides. You sure? All right.
You want to explain it one more time? Also?
This?
No, the break.
Break? Once the program hits break, the loop stops. Done. So like we are saying let I is equal to 0. I is less than 5. If that is ever not true, then we break out of the loop. I plus plus at the end of every iteration. At the end of the loop each time, we add 1 to I, right? I is 0. Is I equal to 3? So we console.log not 3, because we don't go into here, right? So we increment I, so I is 1. I is not 1 is not 3, so we console.log not 3. Go to the bottom, increment again. 2, not 3. Go to the bottom, increment again. 3, I is equal to 3. We go into this, console.log I found it. Found it. Then break. We don't care that this loop was supposed to go until there's 5. We don't care there was supposed to be 2 more not 3s. Because we were looking for one thing, we found it. We found 3. So break stops the loop. Breaks out of the loop. Yeah.
If you have a loop inside of a loop,
Okay.
break.
Inside of the lower loop or the outer loop?
Inside of the lower loop.
The lower
Just
loop
break
breaks.
the lower loop,
Yeah.
but not the outer loop.
Yeah. We'll talk about why that is on Thursday. It's called scope. Any other questions?
So in this case, you don't really need the I is less than 5, do you? Because
Pretty much, yeah. Like, see, like I said before, these are optional, right? So I can delete this and it'll still be fine. What is not optional are the semicolons. The semicolons are not optional. This is the only time I write semicolons. Cool?
Can you write out the code for the while statement you have above in the comments?
This?
Yeah, can you write that out in a for statement?
Yeah, sure. So, let me just comment this out. What was I doing over here? For let I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, if counter mod, nope, mod 2, I mean I, whoops. If I mod 2 is not equal to 0, we will continue. And then down here we will console.log counter, I mean I. So this, we get 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. This is more clear, right? Yeah. So because the thing is like, because of this, because we're like continuing in a while loop, we still have to account for incrementing it ourselves, which is why it's annoying. Well, to use the continue keyword anyway. I feel like I always teach this, and while loops come off as off-putting to people because I don't really use them that much. But there will be times when, logically speaking, that this makes more sense to use. Believe me, okay? Any questions? I will Slack all of this to you later, so don't stress, okay? Cool. What? 1 second. Yo, is this a joke? One second. Technical difficulties. Okay, plan B. I have this PDF. All right. Whoop. Okay, so in this overview, we will be talking about while loops, for loops, and the break and continue keywords. And I will briefly, very briefly go over debugging, okay? So, while loop, like I said before, requires 3 elements, right? The while keyword, a conditional expression that evaluates to a Boolean value, and a block of code. So here we have the while, the conditional inside the parentheses, and then the block of code, right? Easy. The block of code will run over and over as long as the conditional expression evaluates to true. Make sense? Everyone cool with this logic? Cool. So we see here, let count equal to 3. While count is greater or equal to 1, console.log count is count. And then we decrement count, count minus minus. Count is 3, count is 2, count is 1. So once the count is 0, 0 is not greater or equal to 1, so we stop. Does that make sense? Any questions? Cool. So, as you can see, this doesn't do anything, right? While false. That means this will never run. Because this has to be true. This has to be true for the block of code to run, right? Easy. So while true, I showed you guys this. This line will run forever, right? Or until the machine runs out of memory, okay? This is called an infinite loop.
Does the JavaScript have a do while, where like runs it once no matter the while?
A do while?
Like you do it first and then.
Yeah, I think there is. Yeah, that's not part of the curriculum though. Like for this course, so I'm not gonna waste time going over it. But yeah, there is a do keyword.
Yeah, it's like is it really? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there is. I know that's a Java thing. There is? Okay, cool. There is. Something that I've literally never used in my professional career. Does everyone understand the concepts of infinite loops? You have to make this conditional statement eventually evaluate to false. Or else that loop will go forever, okay? This is important. Make sense? Cool. So, we have let count equal 3. While count is greater than or equal to 1, constant.log count is count. But we still get count is 3 a million times. Why is that? We're not decrementing count, right? So, see, these slides are old. So what we're missing here is count minus minus. So once it equals 0, then we would get what we got before. Make sense? Is this clear for everybody? Okay. So the for loop now, a for loop requires 3 elements as well. Well, these are kind of whatever. So the for keyword, the for keyword, 3 optional expressions and a block of code, right? The optional expressions can be thought of as initialization, condition, and final expression, okay? The block of code will run over and over until the condition evaluates to false. Same logic as a while loop, right? So the initialization is run first and only one time. It's often used to define a counter variable, right? Then, before every iteration, the condition is checked to see if it's true. If it is, the for loop will run another iteration, right? If it's not, the loop is done, it doesn't run anymore. After each iteration, the final expression is run. So here we have for let I equal 1, I is less than or equal to 3, I plus plus, constant.log, I is I. I is 1, I is 2, I is 3, done. Because once I is 4, we check this before we will run our next iteration. 4 is not less than or equal to 3. 4 is greater than 3. So it's done, and we break out of the loop, right? And you can loop in either direction. Let I equal 5, I is greater than or equal to 1, I minus minus, so we get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I showed you this before with the string.length, right? I is equal to string.length minus 1, I is greater than or equal to 0, I minus minus. Cool? And you can also increment by any number. I'm always doing I equals 0, I plus plus. However, here we set I equal to 100, I is less than or equal to 300, and I plus equals 100. 100, 200, 300. I feel like most beginners especially get caught up and stuck with thinking that for loops are always I equals 0, I is less than or equal to string or array.length, I plus plus. That isn't always the case. That isn't always what you need to do. For loops, you might need to start them in different places, you might need to increment by different numbers, and you might have to go before the length is over, right? You might have to stop at 2 before or something, okay? You have to really think about it. Don't get into a robotic habit of just writing definitions. I equals 0, I plus plus, I is less than or equal to string element. Okay? Does everyone understand me? Don't fall into a rut, okay? Think a little bit before you write every line of code, okay? No matter how annoying it is. Because, you know, writing out like the for loop definition could get a little annoying. So you could use for loops to iterate through a string. So let letters equals A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Let current letter, I'm saying the current letter is now going to be equal to letters at I, right? Because I is equal to 0, so I will be 0. And when you console out the current letter, you get A, right? And this goes on and on and on until I less than letters.length is no longer true. Does this block make sense to you guys? All it's doing is a simple for loop. I is just going to be 0 until it's the last index. We pull out each current letter and put it into a variable current letter, and we console.log that current letter. Easy, right? Simple? Cool. Right? Any questions? Any questions on for loops? So the continue keyword, like I said before, the continue keyword will cause the loop to skip the next iteration. So if I is equal to 3, continue. So as you can see here, I never is 3. 1, 2, it hit this if statement over here, continue, it skips the rest. It skips the rest of the code. So we never hit that console.log statement, so we automatically just go to the next iteration. Does this make sense? Cool. So the continue keyword also works in while loops, right? So count is equal to 5, count, mod 2 is equal to 0, count minus minus, continue. Console.log, count is count, count minus minus, we get count is 3, count is 1, and that's it. Wait, count is 5 comes first. Yeah.
So the language seems a little counterintuitive for me. So the reason why the console is printing 5, 3, 1 and not 4 and 2 is because 4 and 2 has a remainder of 0 in that parens, and they are continuing, like skipping through 4 and 2 because of that's true. Okay. Yeah.
And we have to do this here because what if we didn't do that here? We would continue, we would skip this, then what is count? It's still 4. We never hit this. We continued. So we never decremented. So then that is how you get stuck in an infinite loop as well. You're right, this is weird language. This is weird to look at. It's nicer in a for loop, honestly it is.
So you actually want the console to print whatever's not true based on the if statement.
Yes.
Okay.
Because what the if statement is doing, you can think of it this way. The if statement is checking for things that we need to skip.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
It's like a
Oh,
filter.
gotcha.
Think about it like that.
Yeah.
I think that makes it a little easier. We're
Yeah.
filtering out all of the even numbers. Yeah.
So in this example, if continue is inside the if block or outside the if block, right above the console.log, it makes no difference, right?
If the continue is here,
It's the continue on line 7 is on line 9. Like you just theoretically wouldn't make a difference, right?
then nothing would be printed. And it will be just an infinite loop and nothing will happen.
Why?
Because count is 5. If count mod 2 is equal to 0, it's not. So the if statement skips. And then we hit continue. And then count is never decremented. So we continue, and the count is still 5.
That makes sense. Okay.
Over and over again. So if the continue is just on the first line, it's an infinite loop, right? With while loops. If this was a for loop, the thing, the incrementer, the plus plus thing, the minus minus whatever, is set in stone in the beginning. So that will happen no matter what at the end of everything, right?
then you're decrementing in the if block.
Yeah, here, but you said pull the continue out of the if block. So if we start out at 5, then that will never run. This. If we put the continue here.
Why would that run if the continue is in the if block? Am I making sense?
The continue 5, if the continue is not outside and it is in the if block, the 5 gets decremented here. If the continue is in the if block, then the next time we hit 4, we get here, we decrement it to 3, and we continue. So 3 will skip. You see? If the continue is outside of the if block, if we ever hit an odd number, it's always just going to never decrement it, and that number will always be the same. Because that if statement will never be fulfilled, so we will never hit this count minus minus here. If it's odd, we have to hit this count minus minus here. But if there's a continue here, how could we ever do that? Right? Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah.
Any other questions on this? You guys sure? Okay. So the break keyword breaks out of a loop immediately. So here we have let my grade equal A, while true. Oh, that sounds like an infinite loop, or it doesn't. My grade plus equals plus the string plus. If my grade dot length is equal to 3, break. If we add plus to A plus, the length is 2. So this if statement is not true, and we will continue our infinite loop, right? We add plus again, A plus plus. Wait a second, that length is 3. So this if statement is fulfilled, so we break out of the loop. And we don't get an infinite loop. Does that make sense? Breaking stops every loop. So once we hit that condition, we can stop our loop. So we can just loop forever until that condition is met, if you know that it is going to be met, right? Yeah.
Is true determined by that if statement?
Is true determined by what if statement?
The length equals 3.
So my grade dot length triples equals to 3 returns true or false. So once the length is 3, 3 triple equals 3 returns 2. I mean true, right? So then we enter the if statement. If it's any number besides 3, then that statement is false, right? Like 2 is not equal to 3. So we don't go into the if statement. Right?
I don't think I'm understanding the context of true in this example.
What I'm saying?
Or what true means in this example.
Oh, this? What this means? Whatever goes into that parentheses with a while loop basically means if that statement evaluates to true, that will run forever and ever until that statement is false. So here, this is like a play on code, right? Not a play on words, play on code. So like, here we're saying run forever, because true is obviously never going to be false. True is an actual value, it's not a variable that we can change. True is true. But in the code, we can still break out of the loop using the break keyword. And that's what we're doing here.
I understand.
You okay?
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Do you have a question?
How do they get to plus plus? Is it incrementing? Like you said, increments the end. Like the first plus, I understand. The second plus.
What's second plus?
A plus plus, right? The left one would be 3.
So this is my grade plus equals a string.
Right. Oh.
Plus plus is incrementing number variables. Plus plus is very specific. Plus equals 1. Plus equals can be used for strings as well, right? Because if you do a string A plus the string plus, you get A plus. And you do it again, you get A plus plus. When you increment strings together, the second string goes onto the back. You know? So this is the same thing as saying my grade is equal to my grade, which is A, plus this. So A plus that is A plus. So then my grade is now A plus. So then my grade is now going to be equal to A plus, my grade, plus another plus. So that's why we get the A plus plus.
So if you would change the 3 to 0, it would remain as an 8, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Then that will be an infinite loop. Because we have let my grade equal A, and the only thing we were doing is adding to it. So the length will only increase, and the length will never be 0. So we will just loop and loop and loop, and the break will never be met, right? If the length is equal to 0. That will never be met. Is that what you're saying?
That was my question. What happened if
If you change the 3 to a 0, it would be an infinite loop. If you change the 3 to a 5, you would get A plus 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 plus. Right? 4 pluses. Right? Because what you're doing is basically just checking the length of the string. Whenever you want a certain length, then we stop, we break. Yeah.
Are breaks? I mean, my question was going to be, are breaks commonly used? It just seems like a very easy thing to screw up. Like, do you feel like
It is easy way to screw up. It also saves a lot of time if you think about it. Let's say you're writing a function. Let's say you're on the job and you're like getting all this data in, right?
Yeah.
And you're looking for a very specific piece of data, but you don't know how much data you're getting in. So if you can loop through the 500 million rows, like no matter what, and like if you found it, you break out of the loop. You don't have to look through anything. You don't have to do those 4 million whatever checks. You know, you found it, you're done. So break keywords are good for optimization. Also, if you're writing long for loops, long while loops, or something like that, sometimes putting a break in there, being like, okay, fine. If I get this, I need to stop the loop. I need to continue. And you can have multiple breaks and multiple if statements. You know, it's all like it all depends on the problem. It all depends on what you're doing. This is just like this is a tool that is available for you. Use it how you will. Same thing with while loops and for loops, continue keyword, break keyword, all of these things. But there's a time and place for things, for sure. So you might never use the break keyword. You might always use the break keyword. I don't know what you guys are doing. It's up to you. That's why programming is cool, all right? There's a freedom to it. You know, you guys can do whatever you want. I'm just here to guide you and teach you, and tell you exactly what to do. Any other questions on this? Yeah, so same thing here, like I is equal to 10, I is greater than or equal to 1, I minus minus, we console.log, I is I. If I is equal to 7, break. 10, 9, 8, 7, I is equal to 7, we found 7, we break. Right? You can use it in while loop and you can use it in for loop. Yeah.
So typically breaks and loops are caused by a false condition, right? A false conditional statement. Like the second statement.
This, yeah, typically, like if there wasn't a break keyword,
Yeah.
this will go until this is not true anymore.
So in that context, where would you use a break? Like, why don't you just use breaks all the time instead of setting up false conditional statements?
Because then you are taking it into your own hands, and you have to trust yourself in your hundreds of lines of code, you know? It's like up to you. Like you can choose where to do it or not. You might find it actually easier to trip yourself up that way though.
By using breaks.
Well, just like if you always use breaks and you never rely at the end or something, you know? Yeah.
Can I set up multiple if statements above that break? Like if I wanted to break at 7 and say like 5, can I do that?
If it breaks at 7, it'll break.
Okay.
That's it.
So that there's only one thing in there.
Mm-hmm.
You can nest the if, right?
Huh?
You can nest another if statement in the if statement, though, right?
Yeah, you could do like if I equals 7, then inside here you could do if, I don't know, something else, and then break. You know, you can nest whatever you want. In this specific example, I don't know what you would do inside there, but, you know. Yeah.
Is there a situation where you would use break twice, like say if it was 5 and 7, but 2 things, and you weren't sure if either of them were going to appear in the thing you were in what order they might appear? Like, would it make sense to use two breaks then? Say you were searching a database and you were looking for two names, and you didn't know if either of those names were in the database or in what order they might pop up in the search.
You would use two
And you
breaks.
wanted to like escape when you hit either of them.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not like
For sure, yeah.
not
I mean, like,
broken to use
for
multiple
here, we're
breaks.
looking for 7. I mean, like, this is like, we're decrementing by 1 at a
Yeah.
time, and like, yeah, we're gonna hit 7 once, you know? But like, if we're getting, like, this is more common, like, in arrays. You guys don't know arrays yet, we're learning them on Friday, but like, arrays hold multiple things, like multiple data types, multiple strings. So like, we could say, if you're looping through that array, you get this string, you want to break. But also, if you get this string, you want to break, you know? It's like looking for 2 things instead of 1, which is fine, just common, you know? Anything else? Cool. So debugging, I'm going to zoom through this so you guys can take a break and start the workshop, okay? So developers spend way more time debugging code than actually writing it. This is very true. So let's start by considering, okay, so in CodePen, or if you're doing the testing thing in Studio Code, you guys will see these things. You want all of these things to be green, right? If they're red, that means they are wrong. You did something wrong. So how can we fix that? This is the thing. This is the actual name of the spec, right? This is the test that is failing. Like I said, in the CodePen, there's describe blocks with its, right? Describe it, whatever. The it is this. The it is the name of the test. So if that's failing, you can read that test and see what we are actually doing. Because inside of the its, we are calling the function that you wrote and passing things into it and expecting a certain answer, right? So here we say reference error, sum is not defined, under this red line. This is exactly what is breaking. This statement is what is breaking, okay? Reference error, sum is not defined. That means that in your code somewhere, you're referencing something called sum, but you never declare it, okay? Another common error you might find is expected undefined to be 0. That means that we were looking for the answer 0, but we got undefined. That probably means you forgot to return something, and you just console logged it maybe. Because functions implicitly return undefined if you don't tell it to return something else. And console.log returns nothing. Right? Console.log returns nothing. Console.log is just for printing in the terminal. Getting values from functions is what return is for, okay? And if you forget that return statement, your function automatically, implicitly, will return the value undefined. Okay? But this is pretty much what you'll be looking at. The actual question, and then what is going on. There is also a stack trace. This might not be as useful to you guys in CodePen because the stack trace, but in other situations, if you're using Visual Studio Code or something, this will actually pinpoint you the line of code where it's breaking, okay? Stack traces are often helpful. Yeah, so like I said, expected 55 to equal 25. That's not an undefined, but it's saying your function gave us 55, but we were looking for 25. That means you messed up your logic a little bit somewhere, okay? It's all here, okay? Before you get frustrated, before you're like, why is it not green? Read this. It might be very simple, okay? A lot of people don't read it, and then they realize that when they wrote the function, they just spelled the function wrong. So then they're just trying to call something that doesn't exist in the code, and they're like, what the hell is this, you know? It happens. People make mistakes, which is fine, okay? I make mistakes all the time. So will you, and it'll be fine, okay? Just calmly assess the situation. These test specs are meant to help you solve problems, okay? Help you debug. Yeah, it's plain English. Expected 55 to be 25. If your test is failing with undefined outputs, make sure you are returning values from your functions, not console logging them. Okay? It can also help to look directly at the code that defines how the test is supposed to work. So like I said, in the it says it returns the sum of all whatever. This is what you will see in that red bar, this string, right? What we are doing in this spec is let return value equal your function that you wrote, only odds passed in 10. Then we respect this return value to equal 25. So like, you can read the actual tests and see what I'm passing into your function, okay? And what I like to do, if I don't know what my function is doing, I like to take a simple argument and mentally walk it through the function. See what happens to that thing. You will find out where it goes wrong eventually, okay? Yeah, that comes harder if your function's really long, but it always works, okay? Because somewhere, something isn't right. There's also a debugger. I won't get into that right now. Also, there's a debugger in VS Code. I also won't get into that right now. But essentially, if you want to on your own, it's not required for this course, in my opinion. But if you wanted to look it up, you could look up like how to use the Chrome debugger. It's in the Chrome DevTools. DevTools are super useful, but I don't expect you to know how to use them, and neither does full stack for you to get it. Okay. Also, the VS Code debugger, honestly, I don't use it myself. But it is there. VS Code is super popular, and the debugger is awesome. I have used it once, but like, I rarely use it. I usually use the Chrome debugger if I need to. Okay? Yeah.
Do you use VS Code?
I do use VS Code, yeah. A little biased when it comes to check. Yeah.
So I tried running the files via VS Code. Is there like a script that you
So I had a couple people like come up to me with problems with that. You have to, like in your terminal, you have to cd into the actual folder that contains a file called package.json. Then you run npm install, and then you run npm run test. And you have to install it for every single folder.
So the Jasmine script will just run tests and it'll just identify
npm run test.
npm run test.
While you're inside of that folder. Cool. If everybody's done with your questions, you can all take a break. A 5-minute break, and then I'll slack out pairs, and then you can start the workshop, okay?